Here is a mind-blowing fact. One man and his descendants killed up to 10% of the entire world's population. In just 2 decades, Genghis Khan and the Mongol Empire forged the largest contiguous land empire in human history, stretching from Korea to Hungary, from Siberia to the Arabian Sea. And what they accomplished changed the course of world history forever. Today, we are breaking down Mongolia's extraordinary story, from nomadic tribes to world conquerors to modern democracy. This is how a relatively small population rewrote the rules of civilization and left fingerprints on every continent on Earth. Let us begin on the Mongolian steppe, that vast grassland stretching across Central Asia. For thousands of years, nomadic peoples roamed these plains, living in felt tents called gurs, herding horses, sheep, and goats. These were not primitive wanderers. They were sophisticated pastoralists who mastered some of Earth's harshest environments. The horse was not just transportation. It was the foundation of their entire way of life. Mongolian children learned to ride before they could walk, and warriors could shoot arrows with deadly accuracy while galloping at full speed. These steppe peoples periodically unified under charismatic leaders and raided the settled civilizations to their south and west. The Xiongnu battled Han Dynasty China. Turkic tribes carved out empires. The Great Wall of China was not built to keep out one enemy. It was built to defend against centuries of steppe warriors who viewed wealthy Chinese kingdoms as prime targets. Yet, these empires typically collapsed after a generation or two, fracturing back into competing tribes. Until Genghis Khan, born around 1162 as Temujin, the future conqueror's early life was anything but promising. His father, Yesugei, was poisoned by Tatar rivals when Temujin was just 9 years old. His family was abandoned by their clan and left to starve on the steppe, which was essentially a death sentence in that environment. Temujin's mother Holan kept them alive through sheer determination, gathering wild plants, catching fish, and teaching her children how to survive. Young Temujin experienced captivity. He wore a wooden collar as a slave. He witnessed his wife Bertie kidnapped by a rival tribe. Each humiliation taught him lessons about power, loyalty, and revenge. Through cunning alliances and the ruthless elimination of enemies, Temujin gradually unified the Mongolian tribes. By 1206, he had achieved what no leader had accomplished in centuries: genuine unity among the fractious steppe peoples. At a great gathering called a Kurultai, tribal leaders proclaimed him Genghis Khan, which means universal ruler. He reorganized Mongolian society along military lines, creating units of 10, 100, and 1,000 warriors based on skill rather than kinship. He established a legal code called the Yasa that applied equally to nobles and commoners. And then he turned his attention outward. Now here is where it gets absolutely terrifying. The Mongol military machine was unlike anything the world had ever seen. Every warrior was a mounted archer capable of firing accurately while moving at high speed. They could cover up to 100 miles in a day using a relay of horses, each warrior typically maintaining 4 or 5 mounts. They employed sophisticated reconnaissance. They used psychological warfare, spreading tales of their ruthlessness to terrify enemies into surrender. When cities surrendered, they were often spared. When they resisted, the Mongols made examples so brutal that other cities would surrender without a fight. This was medieval shock and awe, executed with devastating efficiency. Genghis Khan first turned on China's Jin dynasty, conquering northern China between 1211 and 1234. The Mongols, who were masters of open-field warfare, had to learn siege warfare to crack Chinese fortifications. They conscripted Chinese engineers and adopted siege weapons. proving their remarkable ability to adapt and evolve. Then, westward. The Khwarezmian Empire made a fatal mistake. Their Shah executed Mongol ambassadors. Never insult the messenger when the messenger's boss commands the world's most feared army. The destruction of Khwarezm was so thorough that cities like Samarkand and Bukhara were reduced to smoking ruins. By Genghis Khan's death in 1227, the Mongol Empire stretched from the Pacific Ocean to the Caspian Sea. His death was kept secret for months to prevent rebellions, and he was buried in an unmarked grave that has never been found. It remains one of history's greatest mysteries. But what his successors accomplished was even more staggering. Abbasid Khan completed the conquest of northern China and pushed into Eastern Europe. Kublai Khan conquered southern China, establishing the Yuan dynasty and becoming the first foreigner to rule all of China. His court welcomed Marco Polo, whose accounts would introduce Europe to the wealth and sophistication of the East. Hulagu Khan swept through the Middle East. In 1258, he sacked Baghdad, ending the Abbasid Caliphate. The city's great libraries, repositories of centuries of Islamic learning, were destroyed. The caliph was reportedly rolled in a carpet and trampled by horses, because the Mongols superstitiously avoided spilling royal blood directly. Baghdad never fully recovered from this catastrophe. Meanwhile, Batu Khan's Golden Horde conquered Russia. In 1241, Mongol forces crushed the combined armies of Poland and Hungary at the battles of Legnica and Mohi. Europe seemed utterly defenseless. Then, Abbasid Khan died, and the Mongol commanders returned east for the succession dispute. Europe was saved not by military prowess, but by Mongol politics. And here is the scale of what they built. Roughly 16% of the world's total land area. It encompassed perhaps 100 million people, about a quarter of the world's population. The Pax Mongolia created the first safe trade routes across Asia in centuries. The Silk Road flourished. Ideas, technologies, and diseases traveled freely. Gunpowder, printing, and the compass spread westward. Without the Mongol Empire, the European Renaissance might have looked very different. Yet this vast empire contained the seeds of its own fragmentation. Distances were too great, cultures too diverse, succession disputes too bitter. By the mid-14th century, the empire had fractured into separate khanates. The Yuan dynasty in China fell in 1368, driven out by the Ming dynasty. The age of Mongol world dominance was over. Mongolia itself descended into obscurity. Tribes resumed their old conflicts. Then, in the 17th century, the Manchu Qing dynasty conquered Mongolia, dividing it between Inner Mongolia, which was incorporated into China, and Outer Mongolia, which remained under indirect control. For 2 centuries, Mongolians lived under foreign rule. Their warrior heritage reduced to distant memory. The 20th century brought new upheaval. When the Qing dynasty collapsed in 1911, Mongolia declared independence under the Bagd Khan. But independence proved fragile. Chinese warlords briefly reasserted control. Then came the Soviets. In 1924, Mongolia became the world's second communist state, a Soviet satellite in all but name. Soviet-style communism transformed Mongolia. Nomadic herders were forcibly collectivized. Buddhist monasteries, once numbering over 700, were systematically destroyed during Stalin's purges. Thousands of monks were executed. Yet the Soviets also brought universal education, modern healthcare, and rapid industrialization. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1990, Mongolia faced an existential crisis. The economy, entirely dependent on Soviet subsidies, crashed overnight. But Mongolia achieved something remarkable. It peacefully transitioned to democracy and a market economy without civil war or dictatorship. The 1992 Constitution established a parliamentary republic that has endured despite enormous economic hardships. Mongolia held its first multi-party elections, became the first country in Asia to successfully transition from communist rule to democracy, and has maintained free and fair elections ever since. Modern Mongolia struggles with its identity. Rich in natural resources, copper, gold, coal, uranium. It faces the challenges of resource-dependent development. The tension between nomadic heritage and urban modernity creates social strain. Squeezed between China and Russia, Mongolia must carefully navigate great power politics. Yet this nation of just 3 million people maintains its independence and its distinct culture. Mongolia's journey from world conquerors to occupied territory to modern democracy reminds us that history's trajectories are never simple. The descendants of history's greatest conquerors now live peacefully, more concerned with mining deals and democratic elections than military conquest. The steppe warriors who once terrorized the world now preserve their heritage through Nadam festivals, celebrating wrestling, archery, and horsemanship. What does Mongolia's transformation teach us about the impermanence of power? How does a people maintain identity when their greatest historical achievements occurred centuries ago? Mongolia's story continues, written not with swords, but with sovereignty. If this story opened your eyes to a history you never knew, click the next video and subscribe so you never miss another one.